There have been some really good quarterbacks to come out of the 2023 NFL class so far. You've had the main guys such as CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, Will Levis, and Anthony Richardson. Those guys are all starting to make waves and have been talked about, but there's another quarterback who's not gaining a lot of respect right now, but has a chance at maybe doing something special one day. That is Minnesota Vikings rookie quarterback Jaren Hall. Many don't know this, but he made history for BYU, was at one point seen as a potential first-round pick, and could be the future of the Vikings if things go his way. In today's video, I want to introduce you to who Jaren Hall is, we're to go through his insane story to get here, and how he went from being a part of the class of 2016 to now being a rookie at 25 years old, and his future potential with the Vikings. But before we get started, quickly be sure to leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new and love college football content, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I could do next. Now let's get started and talk about the insane rise of Jaren Hall. Ever since he was a kid, Jaren Hall wanted to be a quarterback, and he'd hear stories from his dad, Kalen, who was a former Cougar who played for Lavelle Edwards from 1992 to 1993. He said, quote, "My dad played at BYU, and I grew up here coming to games. I heard about what he did and what BYU did for his life personally. I've always felt drawn to BYU, and I've seen the difference this place has made in my dad's life and the lives of many family members. It's truly a special place." BYU ran in the family, as his mother Holly graduated from BYU in 1993 and was a gymnast for the Cougars. This program was a huge part of his life, and he grew up in the state of Utah, so he never had to leave the area or leave his fandom behind. Jaren Hall still remembers the first time he played football, as he was 7 years old and had joined the Nevada Youth Football League. Hall ended up playing football in Orem, and that moment stuck with him. It was fun and exciting. He wasn't the only athlete in the family to play for BYU either, as his brother KJ played running back a few years earlier, and his other brother Kyson played wide receiver for the Cougs. He says though his dad wanted him to be different. He said, "I think my dad was sick of seeing all the boys taking beatings at running back, so he decided to make me a quarterback. The second I strapped up a helmet, he had me playing quarterback and stuck with it. I'm thankful to this day that that was the case." Eventually he would arrive at Maple Mountain High School, and he showed flash immediately, but he didn't know what was going to happen for himself long term. For a while, he loved both baseball and football and didn't know which sport to choose. He said, quote, "Later on in high school baseball, I just started playing a lot better, and I realized there could be a possible future there. And then it became kind of 50-50 at that point, and I decided to keep both options open." He did decide early on in high school where he would go though, as Hall committed to the Cougars back in November of 2014. Flash forward to 2023, and he's now with the Vikings. That is a long time. He would stay true to his commitment throughout the process, as he committed in 2015 when Bronco Mendenhall was the coach of the Cougars. Keep in mind, he is now done at Virginia and retired. He said, quote, "It was a great moment for all of us being up there and telling them I decided to take their offer. I love BYU's coaches, and I know it's the right decision for me, so being able to do that was a great experience." Hall's only other offer was from Utah, but he would likely have an impressive offer list had he not committed to BYU so early. He also had interest from Arkansas, Houston, Stanford, Texas A&M, Utah State, and Washington State. As a senior, he threw for 1,336 yards with 13 touchdowns and 8 picks, and also had 387 yards rushing and 4 touchdowns on the ground. It was a somewhat disappointing season, but he did have a good career. But everything would open up for him in terms of recruiting after Mendenhall would leave for Virginia in December of 2015. He needed to be re-recruited by BYU, but he ended up getting cold feet because of the coaching decision and almost switched schools. He said, quote, "In a way, I was very much a legacy kid, but there was a minute there in my senior year when I was thinking of switching to Utah for a second. The reason? He was recruited to Utah by future BYU offensive coordinator Aaron Roderick and Kalani Sitake. He said he loved them both and loved Utah, but when Kalani returned to BYU, that reassured him of where he needed to be. Because he was going to BYU, he was expected to serve a 2-year mission, and that would happen before he got to BYU, so he would not arrive until 2018. What did the scouts think? Well, one said, quote, "Hall is an impressive athlete with the ability to both sling the ball around the field and make plays with his feet. While Hall lacks ideal height for a quarterback, he has all the other physical tools and mental makeup you want in a quarterback prospect." In total, Hall threw for more than 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns during the course of his career at Maple Mountain High School. He was the 6th ranked prospect in the state of Utah and was a big deal for the Cougars. According to 24/7 Sports, he was a 3-star recruit, the number 20 dual threat quarterback, and the 712th best player in the class of 2016. So, how would the legacy kid do at BYU? Let's take a look. So after his 2-year mission, Hall would arrive at BYU in 2018. By the time the 2019 season had rolled around, BYU had gone with their young quarterback by the name of Zach Wilson. He ended up playing decent to start out the year and helped them beat Tennessee on the road, which was extremely memorable. Later on in 2019, though, Hall would make BYU history. He became the first African-American player to ever start at quarterback for the Cougars, and this was a huge deal to him. In that game against USF, he'd end up combining for 2 touchdowns and nearly 300 yards, but they lost to the USF Bulls 27-23. After that, he'd have 2 touchdowns and help them beat Utah State. For the 2019 season, Hall finished with 420 yards and 4 total scores. At the time, Hall was still balancing between the baseball and football team, and after the 2020 season, he'd end up primarily focusing on football. But first, he had to lose the starting job in 2020. Before that season, both him and Zach Wilson were in a neck-and-neck battle, and it only went Zach's way because he had a bit more experience. It was apparently that close. BYU offensive coordinator said, quote, "It was a really competitive battle, as close as it could be. We decided on Zach the week of the first game, and the main reason we chose Zach was because at the time, Jaren was still playing baseball. Zach was all football, yet in spite of that, Jaren kept the competition pretty close. So yeah, he didn't end up playing in 2020, but in 2021, he'd take over as the full-time starting quarterback. Zach Wilson had now left for the New York Jets, and before the season began, BYU's coach Kalani Sitake said his staff was not worried about how their offense would look without Wilson. Hall was the top guy, and he demanded respect and would plug right in and fit. He ended up beating out Gunnar Romney and big-time recruit Jacob Conover for the starting job, and he ended up playing and starting 10 games in 2021, going 8-2. His first big performance would come against Utah, as against the number 21 Utes, he threw for 149 yards with 3 touchdowns and 92 yards on the ground, and they would win. After that, he'd also lead them to a win over number 19 Arizona State, and things were going really good for him. Unfortunately, he struggled in their losses to Boise State and Baylor, but would finish the season on a high note. He'd lead them to 5 straight wins, including victories over Washington State, 4 touchdowns against Virginia, 5 touchdowns against Idaho State, and 4 combined scores in wins over Georgia Southern and USC. In 2021, he finished with 2,500 yards, with 20 touchdowns and 5 picks. Hall had shown flash of brilliance, but he would skip the 2022 draft to come back for the 2022 college football season. In week 1, they'd play against USF, and he helped them win that before a legacy-defining game against Baylor. The number 9 Bears were coming to town, and in a double overtime thriller, they would win 26-20. This was huge, but the following week, they would lose to Oregon. BYU would sort of fall apart after that, as despite 7 touchdowns and combined wins over Wyoming and Utah State, they lost 4 straight games to Notre Dame, Arkansas, Liberty, and East Carolina. Hall still had pretty decent stats in those games, but BYU fans were upset because they weren't winning. Luckily, he'd end his career on a high note, as he'd win his last 3 games as a starter and went out with a bang. He had 4 touchdowns against Boise State, 6 touchdowns against Utah Tech, and 3 touchdowns against Stanford. In total, he finished the 2022 campaign with 3,171 yards, 31 touchdowns, and 6 picks, with 3 more scores on the ground. This was a big deal, and because of him playing baseball and some of his athletic traits, he was compared to both Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson at times. During the 2022 season, his trainer said, quote, "Jaren can make all the throws, and the next step for him is learning how to make all those throws consistently and as accurately as he can to be a big-time NFL prospect." In his final 2 years at BYU, he started 22 games, completed 65% of his passes, threw for 6,174 yards, 52 touchdowns, and 11 picks. He also ran for nearly 800 yards with 4.41 yards per carry. He was out of eligibility and headed to the 2023 draft. What did the scouts think? They said, quote, "He's a compactly built athlete with strong character. He's poised in the pocket and a smooth operator on the move to make plays with his arms and legs. He won't benefit from any scheme winners at the next level and will need to improve his passing anticipation to push the ball versus NFL defenses." In layman's terms, he was a guy who had some potential, had a decent arm, and was a good leader, but was not gaining the same kind of hype as someone like Zach Wilson or someone who could lead an NFL franchise. He was consistently pegged in that day 2 to day 3 range, and that is exactly where he would go. He was drafted in the 5th round with the 164th overall pick by the Vikings, and his trainer thought this was the perfect fit. His trainer said, quote, "He couldn't have asked for a better place to go." The Vikings obviously already have Kirk Cousins as their starting quarterback, but Hall would be a good backup and potentially someone who could develop. At 25 years old, he is already on the clock, but he could be a hidden gem for them. and apparently there are rumors that he may be cut from the roster. In his preseason performances so far, he hasn't looked great. Yes, the offensive line has been sus, but he's looked panicked in the pocket and has apparently been scrambling a ton without being pressured. He just doesn't look confident, and with his age, he might be someone who is better off stashed on the practice squad than being kept on the main roster. Obviously, he's a guy who's going to have to improve, and the NFL is a much bigger stage than BYU. But right now, he's one of the more controversial quarterback picks of the draft. At one time, it looked like Hall was a for sure backup. Now it looks like he may not even make the roster. Either way, he has a great story though, and I don't think things are over yet. He just had a child a little while ago, and he'll definitely be motivated to make it work because he will need to provide for his family. I wouldn't rule the guy out just yet, but either way, he's a great story, was great for BYU, and still has potential to be a hidden gem for the Vikings. We'll just have to wait and see how it plays out though. But what do you guys think? If you're a BYU or a Vikings fan, what do you think of Jaren Hall? Who's another rookie I could take a look at in my next video? What topic should I do next? And before you go, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.